Um, do you choose the songs according to your sermon? No, Tyra normally chooses the songs. It's just how God orchestrates things, how they fall together, and how when we worship together, how God just causes everything to fall in place. Now, though Tyron is off for the month of October, I chose the songs, but I did that already on Tuesday, I think it was. And yeah, I hadn't yet finalized my message yet, but these songs just spoke to me. And if you look at the book of Esther, and if you see how she has come to the point in her life where she is now, if you look at Mordecai, if you look at what they had experienced, if you look what was a huge possibility. Remember, in this point in time, before we read chapter 7, Mordecai didn't know how and if God was going to come through for him. Remember, Haman had erected that pole before he went to that last banquet. And that pole was assigned for Mordecai. Now this morning, you might have a pole that you feel is erected for you. You might have issues, you might be struggling through difficulties, you might, as we sang now and as Bernie prayed, you might be struggling with health issues. You might have fear in your heart about a situation. The list can go on and on and on. And the songs this morning, I believe, really ministered to our hearts. It ministered to mine. If we just look at the songs, the first one, well, we had the opening golden oldies that called us to gather together, because that's where we find God's anointing, God's blessing. But the first song was You Never Let Go. Through the calm, through the storm. In the valley, on the top of the mountain, you were always there. And it says in the bridge, I can see a light that is coming for the heart that holds on. You see how Esther and Mordecai held on. They didn't know what God was going to do. But Mordecai's words to Esther was, if you don't do it, somebody's going to do it. God's going to come through for us somehow, because we are God's people. Hold on, no matter what you are going through. Then we sang Rooftops, and it speaks our response to God's goodness. I'll shout out your name from the rooftops. I'll proclaim that you are God, that I am yours. Remember, that speaks of ownership. I am God's son. I am a child of God, meaning that my Father will take care of me. Then we sang Waymaker. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Think about Esther. Even when I don't see it, even when I don't hear it, you're working. God is constantly busy in our hearts and in our lives. And then we sang a song that we haven't done in a while, because I chose it specifically for a series that we went through, I think it was in last year. That was Promises. God of Abraham, the God of covenant, of faithful promises. And that's what Mordecai could claim. Don't worry, God's going to come through for us, because we are his promised. We are his people. God will come through for you. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. We need to hold on to him. And then lastly, we just sang, I believe you're my healer. I believe you're more than enough for me. And that's not just speaking about physical healing. That's speaking about every part of our lives. You are more than enough for me. So if you are struggling with an issue, if you are struggling with a child, with a parent, with a situation at work, a situation at home, a relational issue, doesn't matter what it is, and I'm not making light of it, but Jesus is more than enough for you. He will see you through. He will carry you through it all. And the closing song, you'll have to wait and see. Okay, let's start the sermon. Okay, I've titled this morning's message, The Downfall of the Enemy. The downfall of the enemy. And any of you who have been excited by this book, probably you weren't able to wait for chapter 7. I know I had to, even though I prepared this thing months ago, I was excited to read chapter 7 again because here we see the heart of the great reversal. You'd remember the last 3 weeks was a mini series within the bigger series that I titled The Great Reversal. And we saw how God started to change things around for his people. Now, I didn't preach any of those messages so far. Our elder Tyrant preached the first one in the beginning of October. And last week, our guest speaker, I asked him, please, to make my timeline work, you have to preach on Esther chapter 6. And he was most gracious to do so. And I believe it was a great encouragement to us as a church. And here we see the downfall of the enemy, the great reversal starting or taking place. Now just take a moment to consider the many ups and downs that the Jews have experienced at this point. Things haven't been smooth. Things haven't been easy for them. You know, all who are in Persia were either removed from their homeland by force or they were born in captivity. So they have never experienced or seen home. Those who were removed by force was because they had lost various battles and because the hand of the enemy was strong upon them, because of disobedience in a lot of areas as well. But here we see one of their very own, Queen Esther, is made and crowned the queen of the kingdom. And there was a celebration. There's this hope. Okay, something's going to change now for us. Here is one of our very own being made queen. But that celebration lasted very, very short because we know Haman organizes this decree. He gets the king when the king is Lakavaram. And we know that was more often than not, whenever you read of King Xerxes, he had a glass in his hand. So Haman times his decree and his request very perfectly, and he gets the king to make this decree. So this excitement, this jubilation was very short-lived. Haman had convinced the king to sign a decree calling for the indiscriminate death of all Jews throughout the kingdom. What does that mean? It doesn't matter if you were male, if you were female, if you were young, if you were old, if you were a child, if you were innocent, if you had nothing to do with the whole thing. Doesn't matter. Every single Jew had to die. Now the king has summoned Haman to attend this banquet that Esther had invited them to, so that she can make this request before the king. Remember how Haman felt that he was the man, because only him and the king were invited to this banquet. He still goes and brags that he's with his wife and his family. The king was invited to the banquet. And guess who else? Me. So he feels important. But I think the fact that he had just escorted Mordecai on his horse with a cloak that was meant for him, with the badge and everything that was meant to be his, the king's trusted official, he must have thought that something's going to happen at this banquet that's not going to be as good as what I think or what I initially thought. In fact, his wife tells him, you can't fight against God. Doesn't matter what you do. The fact that you had just escorted Mordecai through the country, God's people, a Jew, speaks volumes. As we will discover, Esther finally reveals the truth to King Xerxes, and in regard to the decree that he has signed. And there's something that I want to highlight here, and I'm going to mention it again, and I want you to listen out for it. Truth always prevails. The truth will always prevail. Let's read together from Esther chapter 7. We're only going to read the first 4 verses for now. I've changed things around, so those on AV will just need to catch up with me. We'll read the first 4 verses together. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked Queen Esther, "What is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "Finally, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king." Just that far. Esther sounds a little bit dramatic, doesn't she? We know the bigger story, so it sounds legitimate to us. Can you imagine the king? What is this woman talking about? Save my life. You're the queen. Why must you be worried? Save my people. Why must they be worried? I don't think he realized exactly who she was and who her nation was. But let's consider the aspects of their meeting as we discuss the downfall of the enemy. And we're going to pray that God will bless the reading of His Word to us as we're going to read it in batches this morning. Now, the first point is Esther's request. And I've broken that down in, I think, 4 points. Yes. The proceedings, the promise, the petition, and the peril. 4 P's. The day had arrived and everything was in place. As he had promised, Xerxes came along with Haman. Now just imagine the atmosphere at this banquet. You can imagine that there must have been a bit of awkwardness. Haman is not quite sure what's going to take place. He initially had this boldness, this arrogance, that there's a banquet for me and the king. But after his journey with Mordecai, I think he was thinking this thing over a little bit. Something is going to happen here. Esther surely had rehearsed this request in her head a few times. Because remember, this is the 3rd time that the king has asked her the same question. What is it? What is your petition? What is your request? And each time she puts him off. I'm not ready yet for you. I'm not ready yet to answer you. But you can imagine that she's quite nervous, quite anxious as she needs to speak to the king, as she needs to finally come through with this question. And you see that Haman the king almost puts her nerves at ease again by asking her, "What is it that you want? Tell me what you want. Even up to half the kingdom will be yours." On the other hand, we think of Haman. He must be filled with anxiety and uncertainty at this point in time. He had just been required to honor Mordecai, his enemy, and he is probably unsure of what is about to transpire now at this banquet. And here we see the promise come through. We see for the 3rd time Xerxes promised to grant Esther's request, up to half the kingdom. He must have sensed her apprehension and he wanted to put her mind at ease. And I'm also sure he was curious. What does this woman want to ask of me? Why has she taken so long to ask this question? Now I want to quickly just say, as believers, being saved by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we too have such a promise. Ask whatever you want. Ask whatever you need. We can approach the Lord our God with any need at any time, knowing that He will listen and respond to our need. We just sang the song, God of Promises. But if you don't believe me, John chapter 16, verse 23 to 24 says this. In that day you will no longer ask me anything. Very truly I tell you, my Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. Until now you have not asked for anything in my name. Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. You need more proof? 1 John 5 verse 14 says this, and I love this one. This is the confidence we have in approaching God, that if we ask anything according to His will, He hears us. Amen. So here we see this foreshadowing take place, where Esther realizes that she can ask the king whatever she needs, and the king will come through for her. The same way our king will come through for us. Now let's look at the petition. Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request." And I'm sure this got the king's attention. Who has the audacity to threaten the queen? Who has the audacity to threaten my queen? I'm the king. He had no idea what Esther would ask, and she requests that her life be spared along with her people. Now, who would have been bold enough to plot the death of the queen? One thing was certain, the king was paying attention now. The king was paying attention. The queen had finally asked her question and had got his attention instantly. It seems apparent that Xerxes had not expected such a request, because his offer was even up to half the kingdom. He's thinking of financial gain, of property, of things that she could want. Now let's look at the peril. Esther reveals the great danger and utter hopelessness she and her people face. Had they been sold into slavery, at least there would be hope for their eventual release. But Esther declares that she and her people have been sold out, and all of them would be slain and perish. Esther knew that she needed someone with authority to come through for her. Esther knew that she needed someone with authority to intervene for her and reverse this decree. We later on find out that that cannot be done, but she knew that she needed to turn to the one who is able to do something. You see, we too stand in that condition apart from Christ. Sin creates separation and bondage, but it also results in eternal death. Humanity stood in need of one who was able to redeem them from sin and restore us unto God. Christ alone was the only one worthy to accomplish that task. And thankfully, he was willing to offer himself as a living sacrifice in our place. He died for the sin of humanity so that we can stand and be saved and reconciled to God. Now let's carry on with verse 5. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he, the man who has dared to do such a thing?" And Esther said, "An adversary, an enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in rage, left his wine again, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. And here we see how the king responds. Firstly, we see how Esther asks of the king, how Esther approaches the king. And here we see how King Xerxes responds. And he responds in three ways. He responds with an appeal, he responds with an answer, and he responds with anger. So let's first see the appeal. Surely feeling as if his sovereignty has been challenged. Remember, he's king and somebody's challenging him now. And upset that he is unaware of such a plot, the king questioned who would do such a thing so that this individual might be found. There is no question regarding the identity of our adversary. He is well known by those who serve the Lord, and he is well known of the Lord himself. He is very subtle in his approach, seeking to deceive all he can. But we are not unaware of his plans and his tactics. You see, knowing the enemy that we face helps us as we prepare to deal with his attacks. You see, the king wasn't aware who this was. But when Esther revealed who the enemy was, the king could deal with the situation. So we too know who our enemy is. And we need to come before God, before our king, so that our king can deal with our situation and with the attacks that are against us. And here we see the answer. And Esther said, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman is afraid before the king and the queen, and Esther quickly identifies Haman as a wicked adversary and enemy. She pointed out her accuser to the king as he was present with them at the banquet. And this struck fear in Haman. Here's the thing. We are no match for the enemy in ourselves. We are no match for the enemy by ourselves. Remember Esther? She was no match to Haman. Remember Mordecai? He was no match to Haman. Haman was one who was in great leadership. He could say and do whatever he wanted, because remember, at this point in time, he still has the king's signet ring on his finger. So what he says goes, because the king had entrusted him with that authority. You see, when we are on our own, in our own strength, with our own thoughts, with our own desires, we stand no chance against the enemy. We are no match for the enemy within ourselves, but we have no reason to fear, because we stand in the presence of our King. Have you ever been in a situation where there were some bullies around you, maybe at school or wherever it was, some people who you were scared of? Now, I was very small when I was in school. I was so small that in grade 8 they locked me in the lockers because I was so small. My sister was much smaller than me. If I'm standing like this, you know my sister, she fits under my arm. But my sister was something else. She went up to that biggest bully and she said to him, "Jy beter my broer uit daai lokke gaan haal. My ma gaan jou frik ry vandag." Can I say that word around? My ma gaan vir jou omry vandag. My ma ken nie van brieke nie. And it just so happens that my mom, as she drove that day, she didn't even know about this situation, but her foot slipped on the clutch. And her car jerked, and he was just so happening to walk across the road. He never ever looked my way again. Never. You see, when you are standing with someone in authority, you are not afraid. You are not afraid. You see, Esther wasn't afraid anymore because she was standing with the king. She had the king by her side. In the same way, when we face our enemy, knowing that the king is standing by our side, we have no fear. We do not need to be afraid. No matter what the doctor says, no matter what diagnosis we are given, no matter what our bank account says, no matter what people around us say, when we stand with the king, we have to fear no evil. We must be willing to identify the enemy and stand committed against his agenda and his attacks. Refusing to admit our struggles or face them with the help of the Lord will always result in defeat. You see, that is plan B, isn't it? But sometimes, some of us, we get the alphabet wrong because we start with plan B and then we go to God afterwards. You see, we must do as Esther did, and we need to plead our case before the Lord. When you come in prayer before your king, ask him whatever you wish. Ask him whatever you need. Ask him for strength. Ask him for healing. Ask him for understanding. Ask him for compassion, for guidance, for wisdom. You can ask him whatever you need, and you do not need to be afraid, because he is with you. Then we see how the king responds in anger. Now, we don't like to associate anger with God, because God is holy. But we saw even how Jesus responded to the tax collectors and to those who were in the temple doing their own thing, and he responds in anger. Now, it seems apparent that if Xerxes had known Esther was Jewish, he had not considered the implications of the decree that he had signed off on. Clearly, he's angry with Haman and excuses himself from this banquet so that he can just go and cool himself down and ponder his response right now. I think he must have realized that he had put his foot in it, because he had authorized that decree. The king became enraged that anyone would attack the queen without cause. And you see, Haman is struck with sheer terror now. He knew the king would not respond favorably to such an accusation that could be proven. And he stands to plead his case with the queen, while the king is out. Now, various things could have taken place. If the king had a glass, Haman probably had a glass. And Haman fell over the couch. I don't know if it was because of the glass, or because of fear, or whatever the reason was. I'm not going to read too much into it. But you see, his intention wasn't to harm the queen. He just wanted to beg of the queen. And of course, Murphy's law, the king would walk in as he falls, and the king sees something from a different perspective. He stands to plead his case with the queen, seeking her help in appeasing the king's wrath. You see, we face a determined adversary who seeks to defeat and destroy all he can, but his power is limited and his days are numbered. Our enemy's power is limited and his days are numbered. He will one day face the wrath of King Jesus, and he is bound and cast into the lake of fire for eternity. That is his destiny. Let's carry on reading from verse 8. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attended the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Thirdly, we want to look at Haman's repayment. And we see in this section the discovery, the deliberation, and his demise. You see, Haman had fallen on the queen's couch, pleading with her to intervene for him, as the king had returned from the garden. And this further enraged the king, who viewed this as an arrogant and provocative act. The servants immediately restrained Haman and covered his face, and this in itself revealed what his outcome would be. This revealed the determined fate that awaited Haman. You see, his hatred, his arrogance had sealed his doom. Afrikaans says it the best way. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I'm going to say it. Hy het 'n lat, somebody else said it, vir sy gat gepluk. he, through his anger and arrogance, set himself up to be destroyed. You see, his fate, one could say, came from his own hands. Look at your enemies. Think about them. Let them build that pole, because they will soon be impaled on it, not you. Sorry. Esther 7 verse 9 says this, Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attended the king, said, A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king says, impale him on it. Now we have to remember something. Haman hadn't had an opportunity yet to speak to the king about Mordecai. Haman hadn't had an opportunity yet to say that Mordecai won't follow the rules. Mordecai doesn't want to bow before me. Haman hadn't approached the king yet. Before he was able to do so, the king speaks to him and tells him to parade Mordecai on that horse with the cloak and the tunic and everything. So the king didn't know about this pole, but the people around him did. Those within the palace knew that he had prepared the pole to impale Mordecai. And Xerxes gives an immediate response to that information. Well, then put him on it. Put him on that pole. The pole that was prepared for Mordecai was the pole that he himself was impaled on. You see, this infirms the truth that right is never wrong and wrong is never right. God will honor those who seek to honor him and live according to his will for their lives. Again, I want to say that truth will always prevail. And here we see the demise of Haman. Haman awoke that morning feeling as if all his plans were coming together. His hatred prompted him to devise a plan to murder an innocent man, but God intervened for Mordecai himself. Even his wife, who was not a Jew, even his wife who encouraged him to do the wrong thing before the time, even she says to him in chapter 6, listen here, there's no hope for you. And by implication, that means there's no hope for her. There's no hope for the family. There's no hope for any of them. What you have done today against God's people will be counted against you. God intervened on Mordecai's behalf. Before the sun would set, Haman was impaled on the pole he had prepared for Mordecai. You see, his hatred and his prejudice led to an untimely and horrific death. And this appeased the wrath of Xerxes. Now Satan too is going to face this utter demise at the end of the age. Christ rose in victory over sin, over death and hell, and one day the enemy will be bound in judgment and cast into the lake of fire, never to hinder mankind again. Now unfortunately there are some who will follow and will suffer a similar fate. Some, like Mordecai, who followed his example, who encouraged his wrongdoing. There are unfortunately people around us who do not want to turn to God for whatever reason. There are those who seek for self, who walk this world with anger, with resentment, with a sense of entitlement and arrogance, who are going to face the similar fate. You see, this passage reveals that truth will always prevail. While many around the world may suffer for their relationship with Christ, in the end they will be saved. Although we might suffer now, our treasures are stored up in heaven, and we will be saved. The Lord knows who is his, and he has made provision for us in heaven. I have gone to prepare a place for you. In my house is many rooms. You see, the truth we embrace by faith will guarantee us eternal life. Now, these verses, as I said, reveal a great tragedy as well. They reveal a great tragedy because many are walking in a path similar to that of Haman. They are caught up in the power, the prestige, and the wealth of the world, while never considering their eternal state. You see, all who die apart from God, all who die apart from Christ, will face eternal separation and condemnation in hell. Now, I have to remind you, no matter what we are going through, it doesn't matter how difficult the proceedings of this life might be, we have a promise. Going back to those 4 P's. It doesn't matter what the proceedings are, what's happening in the here and now, or what we have gone through. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not making light of it. But in the bigger picture, it doesn't matter because we have a promise. We have a promise. We live in the promise. God will always come through for us. But just like Esther, we need to bring our petition to the king. That's the 3rd P. We need to bring our petitions to the king. We need to tell him of our peril, what we are facing, our troubles, our fears, our problems. We need to tell him about what we are going through. We all know God knows everything. He's the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. He's the author and the perfecter of our faith. He knows our story. He wrote our story. But sometimes we need to know that he knows what I'm going through. And so we need to tell him, God, this is what I'm facing. I need you. You see, it's when we can mention those things, knowing that we are in the presence of the King. It's not that we're informing him of our situation. We're informing ourselves in whose presence we are. Because we are reminded that in the King's presence, this peril seems like nothing. Because my King is bigger than. My King is the healer. My King is the provider. My King is the sustainer. So it doesn't matter what I bring to the King. If I'm in the presence of the King, I have no fear. You see, he will answer our appeal according to his will. And we will be restored to him. And Satan and his demons will see the anger of God. Those are the 3 A's. Against them, and we will see their demise. Now just listen to what happens to those who remain faithful. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm only going to read 2 verses of chapter 8. Just listen to what happens to those who remain faithful, to those who honor God in word and deed. Esther chapter 8 verse 1 and 2. That same day King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. The great reversal. Isn't that so amazing? That what the enemy tried to do, the king turned around for their good. What the enemy tries to do and tries to achieve in your life, if you bring that to the king will reverse that, and you'll see that you will be blessed, you will be restored, you will be elevated. You will see the great reversal taking place in your life. Isn't that exciting? That is what encouraged me through this chapter. Even though I wasn't feeling well, and even though my head is very cloudy, I must be honest, I said, I need to speak this word because this word is exciting. There's a great reversal taking place here. It's so good to see what the enemy plans for his good. God turns around and makes it his good. So this morning, I want to encourage you, whatever you're going through, bring it to God. We are about to gather around the communion table. And I wanted to initially serve everybody this morning, but I don't want to get too close to the communion. So I've asked them just to prepare it for us, and I will invite you to partake in the front of the communion. But I want to say this. In us partaking together this morning, and I think it probably worked out better because